it's Dandelion. Hope you're having a beautiful day. Today I'd like to talk about cholesterol. I mentioned it yesterday in the live video about increasing fertility, and several people messaged and started asking more about cholesterol, and we've had some decent discussions about it, so I'll just give a few minutes for people to join, and then we'll dive right in. Feel free to ask any questions and we'll discuss. So currently I'm hanging out in the mushroom garden at Cherry Valley Co-op, and it's a beautiful place. Luckily the weather's not too hot today. So what I wanted to mention is a few things about cholesterol. A lot of people say, well, how can I get cholesterol from a vegan or vegetarian, well, let's say a vegan diet? The short answer is you can't. There's no cholesterol in a vegan diet. So what happened basically is in the 80s, the vegetable oil industry started using propaganda against the dairy industry and doing this research. And of course, you know how research works. They do 10 studies. Whatever ones they prefer, they will publish. Whatever ones that they don't prefer, they won't publish. So there were some studies published about how cholesterol is responsible for heart attacks, essentially. So we got really afraid of cholesterol. This was to the vegetable industry's benefit. And what did the vegetable industry do as a response to that is they made things like hydrogenated vegetable oil, soybean oil, genetically modified soybean oil, and these are sort of the healthy solutions, right? So we went from, you know, full fat milk, butter, cheese, things like that, and eggs, to margarine. And of course you all know, maybe you've seen, even ants won't eat margarine. If you leave margarine out, nothing will touch it. Margarine is basically like plastic, right? And it's a butter replacement, so it's seen as the healthier butter replacement. Now, don't forget that that fake vegan butter, Earth Balance, that is genetically modified soybean oil. Very toxic stuff as well. So in the 80s, we had this kind of propaganda against cholesterol being responsible for clogging your arteries and therefore for heart attacks. Now, I want to mention, first of all, cholesterol has both functions of clogging your arteries, but also actually opening your arteries. Cholesterol removes arterial plaque as well as create arterial plaque. So it's not just a one-off thing. Cholesterol also is responsible for your human hormones, including steroid production, thyroid production, hormone production. Cholesterol is an essential basis for all human hormones. And so you look at the world, let me know if the drilling is too loud. You look at the world and you see a whole bunch of thyroid issues, you see a whole bunch of hormone imbalances. We're definitely depleted with our endocrine systems, and we have this real battle between healthy and not healthy cholesterol. So there is two kinds of cholesterol, HDL and LDL, and of course we see them as good and bad. And that's kind of an oversimplification. Just like there's good bacteria and bad bacteria, it's not exactly how the body works, and the body needs all kinds of fats. So one of the things that we mistake is when you go to the grocery store and you shop around, you can get a lot of processed foods from very far away which contain fat, right? So cashews, for example, are a fat source. Cashews also destroy animals to produce them. Coconut oil helps the body produce cholesterol. It does not have cholesterol, but coconut is a monoculture that comes from the jungle, where they're cutting down the rainforest to grow more plantations with child slave labor or adult slave labor conditions to grow the coconuts that we want. So when you go to the health food store and you choose based on what's available at the grocery store, yes, it may seem like getting a low-fat diet, low cholesterol diet is healthy, and it is for some time. But why? One of the things is that we grew up in a culture which over-consumes meat products in an excessive way, which are all factory farmed, they're treated terribly. And so you think about bacon. Is bacon healthy or toxic for you? Well, definitely if the pig is in a factory farm, it's drinking horrible chemical water, it's being injected with antibiotics, it's getting heavy metals in its food system. They've been caught, the dairy industry has been caught feeding expired Skittles to cows. They give them antibiotic injections, mandatory. That creates a very different bacon or beef than a cow or a pig in your ecosystem that you're feeding your compost scraps to. So cholesterol is not necessarily the demon, because cholesterol is necessary for hormone function. So yesterday we talked about herbs to increase fertility, and in that I mentioned cholesterol. Now, fat sources as a whole are not replacements for each other. So cashews are not a replacement for butter. There are fats. There are many different types of fat, right? There's medium chain triglycerides, there's long chain triglycerides, there's cholesterol. So nuts produce and provide some of those necessary fats, but not all of them. So with cholesterol, we have to think about the amount of cholesterol that we're getting, and then the lifestyle and the activities that we're leading. So if you're getting factory farmed bacon, which is injected with antibiotics, they inject it with hormones to make it bigger. First of all, it's also grown, these what would you call those? These lineages of cattle and pigs, for example, that they're growing and raising are basically too fat for their own good. They're too big for their own legs. So yeah, that's horrible. And even if you consume animal products, you should be very much against factory farming and those factory farming practices. There's nothing healthy and nothing good about factory farming animals in horrible conditions and then consuming their bodies. Now, that doesn't mean that cholesterol is a demon and unnecessary. Where a place, says Mr. Javar, please explain. So cholesterol, being responsible for healthy human hormones, is helpful in moderation, and it won't just give you a heart attack if you consume cholesterol. So there's a big difference between, the Amish producing butter out of cows that are grazing on wild pasture versus getting factory farmed Land O'Lakes butter or something that has all kinds of chemicals in it. So is the cholesterol bad for you, or is it the additives, the hormones, the injections of antibiotics, the poor water, and the poor immune health that those poor animals go through? And that's something that we should distinguish between. So it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing. Now, we've also come out of a culture who overconsumes meat. 6 or 7 days a week is too much, right, for the human body. And if you look at an indigenous culture, basically they would consume some meat when they could, and that required hunting. And so they would eat a predominantly vegan and vegetarian diet, and then once a month or twice a month they would have a successful hunt and consume the meat and cook in the fat. So I think a lot of it has to do with the consumption, the amount of consumption, and also the source. And so cholesterol necessarily is not bad for you. It's extremely essential for human health, and it cannot be found in any vegan source of food. As I mentioned, coconut oil is one of the only ways that you can increase your cholesterol levels, but if you're increasing cholesterol from your body, that doesn't mean that your body's getting it from your food sources. So fat is a necessary thing, and there are many types of fats, and there is not just a replacement. You can't necessarily replace cholesterol with coconuts, right? You cannot necessarily replace your cholesterol sources with cashews. And if you really start to think about factory farming as a whole, even if it is vegetarian or vegetables, factory farming is still harmful to the land. It still produces monocultures. It still kills animals, so cutting down the jungle for palm oil is something now we're familiar with, but we don't often think about the palm oil phenomena with coconut oil, right? It takes a lot of coconuts to produce all that coconut oil. So now we demonize palm oil, but we think coconut oil is coming from heaven, but it's not. They're cutting down the jungle all over the planet to produce coconuts, coconut plantations for us in the first world to consume at a large rate. So localizing our fat source is something that I've been working on as a forager for a really long time. I started foraging as a vegan, and after 5 years went to vegetarian, and now I'm an omnivore, largely because my friends had chickens and I got to raise them and take care of them, and I decided that I would eat eggs for a month to see how I felt. And at the time, my fingernails had indentations, like pocks in them, and they also had a lot of ridges. And oftentimes, that's due to a lack of fat sources. So fat is a wide spectrum. There's not one fat to replace another fat. They're all necessary for human health. That's why they've been in our diet for so long. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to eat a factory farmed pig, right? But that I want you to consider where your fat sources are coming from. Fat is a necessary macronutrient. So there are 3 macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. We are able to eat a predominantly, so when I was vegan, I would eat, lots of greens. Greens produce vitamins and minerals. They don't have fat, carbohydrates, and protein. No green vegetable has protein. Hemp seeds are one of the best. They have 16 amino acids, but amino acids are not protein chains. And when you consume those amino acids, they build protein chains in your body. Animals have actual protein chains that they've already put together, so they contain protein. So there is no vegetarian protein source. There are vegetarian sources of amino acids. Beans and rice combine to make the 10 essential amino acids, which builds protein. So you can get protein sources from the vegetable world if you combine foods properly. But fat, especially cholesterol, you're not going to be able to get from vegetables. And so that's a very difficult thing to start asking, well, where do I get cholesterol from? We have a real local hookup on things like butter. So we've met the cows, and it's very different. We know the people who raise the cows, we know what they feed them. You're not supposed to feed cows and pigs grain, right? Grain gives them wicked gas, reduces their immune system, things like that. So wild pasture is very important. Small scale is very important. Caring and loving for the animals is very important. We also live close to the Amish. The Amish produce really great butter, right? So it's very different than going to a grocery store and buying Organic Valley or something. So I'm not a big fan of going to the grocery store and buying packaged meat or buying Organic Valley. But as a forager, the big question is, where am I going to get fat from? And so I used to, take a backpack into the woods for 3 to 5 days, and I would bring a jar of coconut oil. And I would realize that when you're living in the woods, you're collecting your own firewood, you're walking miles, you're scavenging for resources, you're burning a lot of calories. And that's something that if we live in sedentary jobs where we sit around and then you can eat whatever you want, and then just go to the grocery store if you feel depleted and get whatever you want. So Conscious Evolution says, however, the animal protein is broken down into the amino acid components, yes, hence requiring a more intensive digestion process, so more plant amino acid sources are better return on energy investment. That may be true, but not if you were actually gathering those plant sources yourself. And that's something we don't often factor into the equation. If you want to live off of a grocery store, that's indeed true. And if you want to continue to work a job to provide yourself money to go to a store to support factory farming, even if it is vegetables, then yes, that does make sense. But as a forager, if you go out in the wild and try to live off of fats and proteins and carbohydrates that you gather, we often forget that you're spending energy to get energy, right? And so that's also a factor in that discussion. Just because you can go to the health food store and drive and use fossil fuels to get there, and so you don't have to burn your own human calories, then you can get a bigger return on investment. But don't forget the environmental detriment to being able to go to on your car, right, and go to the health food store and get all those things. Conscious Evolution says right on, 9 calories in fat versus 3 calories in protein and carbohydrates. That's very interesting. So for me, I've come to the feeling like I would like to get off the grocery store entirely. I would like to get my fat and my carbs from the land. And so now I'm living on a 100-acre farm, and we are engaging in conscious as possible of hunting practices. We're also raising animals. We have intention for milking our own animals, feeding them our compost scraps, everything coming off the farm, creating a closed loop so that we don't have to necessarily go to a health food store and support factory farming, even if it is vegetables. And so every bit of of fat that I can get off this land stops me from going to Whole Foods, which is exploiting the third world to get these carbohydrate and fat sources. So when you look to your local landscape for fat and carbs, and you don't actually just go to the health food store and spend all your money to buy them from the third world, it really changes up the game, especially if you're providing them with your own hands, if you're looking for your own hands. So there's not a lot of fat out there in nature, especially in New Jersey, right, which doesn't run away from you. So thinking about where you're going to get not just cholesterol from, but actually fat sources from the land. And so some people will say, well, nuts, there's nuts, right? You don't understand necessarily how much calories you have to burn to harvest and collect acorn enough to survive off of. And so if you are out there and you're buying tons of cashews and you think that nuts can be a sufficient source of your calories, right, first try to forage your own, right? Try to live off of foraging your own acorn. I've been doing that, right? And it's not easy, and it requires a lot of work. And every time you walk, you're burning energy that you wouldn't necessarily burn if you just got in your car and went to a health food store and bought a bag of cashews, because someone else is using their human energy to produce and provide you those cashews. And so the factor of spending energy to get food is totally missing when you're not foraging or farming. So yes, if you go to the health food store and you buy food from the health food store, it appears as though there's a healthier version. And the vegan diet, for example, could be the most beneficial if you want to live off of grocery stores. If you don't want to live off of grocery stores and you live anywhere but basically Florida and California, fat is going to be a really big issue. And so I could import avocados from Mexico and eat avocados and cashews from Malaysia and eat cashews. But is that really a sustainable diet? Is that really a healthy diet for the planet? Do you think that that doesn't kill animals? Do you think that all the fossil fuel bellowing out of all that process isn't killing animals, isn't destroying the planet? So then how do we localize? How do we eat from less than 200 miles? And there's a reason that native people weren't the Lenape of this land. There's a reason that they ate the diets that they did. Sardella says, truly considering raising chickens in my yard. Till then, a lot of neighbors have eggs for sale within blocks, thankfully. Looking for farm co-op near Bayville. Is that New Jersey? Bayville, New Jersey? Yeah, so that's really changed my experience, is actually raising the chickens that I'm eating the eggs from is very different than, sorry, Paradise Marnie, that's kind of, I'm not saying that there needs to be a black or white battle between vegetarian versus carnivore. I'm saying that there's a lot of gray area that we don't necessarily talk about. And it's very easy to buy cashews from child slave labor and think that we're saving the planet, but we're not. Plastic bags are not helping the planet. Plastic bags in any way, shape, or form are not are harming animals, you know. And so it's a gray issue. It's a bigger issue than what we can get at the grocery store and what stickers are on the products that we consume. So I'm trying my best to live off of a diet that I can harvest with my hands. And so that requires me to grow the fat and the carbohydrates that I seek. And I've planted trees and they take 12 years, right? So you can't sit around and wait for acorns to drop for 12 years. And I've harvested acorn for 3 weeks straight and processed them out for 3 weeks straight. And I got 5 loaves of bread, which was awesome, but you're not gonna survive off of 5 loaves of bread until next acorn season. So I would recommend anybody who wants to live off of nuts and carbohydrates to try to harvest them in the wild or farm them. And that's a really humbling experience. And it really opened my eyes as a vegan. Sardella, that's awesome. You can always stop at Cherry Valley Co-op. We have lots of eggs. We care for them a lot, and that's our local egg source. So as a forager, I'm on this land. I'm growing duck potato. I'm growing groundnut. I'm growing cattail, right? And I'm wild harvesting as much as I can. Of course, the nut season isn't here. I do have a lot of leftover nuts that I harvested last season, right? But again, if you're shelling them, you're spending energy, right? So you're not getting as many calories as you would if you bought them in the grocery store. If you have to move and crack open the nuts that you're providing, or with acorn, it's quite an intensive process. Don't forget you're spending energy to get energy. And that's not true in the grocery store. especially if you have a job which is sedentary, which just requires you to sit there until you get money so that you can get in your car to drive to the health food store to buy the fat and the calorie sources. You're going to be burning a lot less energy than usual. And so it's about energy in, energy out. And that's a really important thing, and I recommend everybody try to localize your food source, because the #1 killer on the planet is burning fossil fuel to ship, import, and export foods. And so would it be more ethical for me to eat avocados that, I'm in New Jersey, so would it be more ethical for me to get avocados shipped from Mexico, you know, with slave labor, children probably harvesting those avocados? Or would it be more ethical for me to eat eggs, which we're raising on this land, which is right 10 feet away from me? So this is kind of the gray area question. I don't recommend that anyone change their diet necessarily as a result of this discussion. I recommend that maybe we can start having the discussion in a less sort of polarized way, because it's not as black and white as it seems if you want to get off of the grocery store. If you want to just continue to give all of your money to a grocery store which does not have your best interest in mind, which has a lot of toxic side effects to how the environment is worked with, used, right, is exploitive towards wild land. Yes, factory farmed cattle and pigs cause horrible, horrible detrimental situations, but cutting down the jungle and killing bonobos for coconuts is not exactly, you know, elves in heaven providing you the calories you need. So if we look at less than 200 miles, so here's your task for the day. Look at your fat source from less than 200 miles away. How can you get at least 2,000 calories? Do some math. How can you get at least 2,000 calories out of your local diet every single day from 200 miles or less? How do you get that fat? You're not going to get cholesterol if it's vegetarian or vegan, but how do you at least provide your fat source? If you didn't have the fossil fuel industry providing you grocery store options for fat, what would your local fat source be? So let me know. Conscious Evolution says, important topic, a need for discussion. Like you said, disconnect is there. Too easy to just throw a Whole Foods product in the grocery cart and assume you're supporting the planet. Yes, right? Plastic bags full of little 8 ounces and 16 ounces of things that came from heaven, obviously, because they have a vegan sticker, and we never think twice about where they came from before that. Sardella says, also I feel a healthy lifestyle is becoming more difficult due to commercial interests and higher costs, which doesn't reflect most incomes. Hope I expressed it correctly. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. We are basically in a privileged diet, right? It's a privilege to be able to have a dietary sort of religion that says, no, only this way, only that way, but try to do it off your own hands, right? And that's an important thing. So, for example, if you're a vegan farmer out there and you're providing all of your own food, what is your fat source? Please tell me. And then there are some options like Paw Paw. You've heard me probably talk about Paw Paw. Asimina triloba is a fat source. It's a fruit with a fat source. It doesn't have cholesterol, but it does have fat. Now, I've lived off of trying to harvest Paw Paw enough to, you know, sustain myself. But let me tell you, first of all, there's not enough of it for everyone, sort of. You know, that kind of idea. And then it doesn't last. It's not very shelf stable, and you're never going to be able to harvest enough till next Paw Paw season. So yeah, you can get a bunch of Paw Paws to live for a week, and then what are you going to do after that? Go back to the grocery store, buy your cashews, you know. Let's see here. Conscious Evolution, the local diet eliminates the overexposure to specific foods year-round. Yes, and that's, I think, a big problem. You shouldn't eat avocados. You shouldn't eat 3 avocados every day. That's not healthy either. Even though it seems like a healthy food, if you mono diet, right, that is also shutting down your genetic diversity. And so we need exposure to diverse foods so that we can build resilience in our immune system, and we can develop resilience to allergies, right? So if you're eating, you know, a raw food diet and you look down and everything is made out of cashews and dates, you know, which is a large problem in the desert, or in the jungle, then that's also a mono diet, and that's not necessarily healthy. You know, as Conscious Evolution is saying, tomatoes in January, like I don't eat tomatoes until they're ripe on the vine, and then I scarf tons of them, and then when they're gone, and I don't buy tomatoes in the store. I think that that is how you end up cleansing. You do all your organ cleansing by eating a localized diet, right? So when the berries are in, you gorge on sugar and your pancreas is like, whoa, this is intense. And then the berries are gone and you dry some, but you don't have enough to live off of, 20 pints of berries every day if you're foraging, right? And that's where native people, that's what native people were doing for generations. Sardella says, also local farmers get no help from the government resources, so they need community support to continue farming for years to come. Amen to that. Join your local CSA, get involved in your farm stands, farm shares, farmers markets. Bring your money back to your local farmers. That is the #1 thing you can do. So of course at Cherry Valley Co-op, we have 150 CSA members. We have a farm stand open from Thursday to Sunday. If anybody's in the Princeton area, feel free to come by, get your veggies, eggs, and lots of other things from us and our local community, and that's really how it goes. Smoothie Love says papaya. Papaya has no fat, no calories, no carbohydrates. It has a lot of vitamins, has a lot of water. It doesn't have any fat, as I understand. So that's a little bit about kind of getting your local fat sources. Again, if you're out there, just think about where you're going to get your fat, especially your cholesterol, from less than 200 miles away. And that, I think, is maybe one of the best votes that we can do to localize our food sources. So be in touch. Oh, Paw Paw. Paw Paw is Asimina triloba. It's a wild fruit that grew all over North America and was actually proliferated by mastodons. They would eat the whole pawpaw and then poop it out, and their poop would be the best medium for their growth. But they're pretty rare these days, although they're becoming like a trendy superfood kind of thing. The problem with Paw Paw is they're not shelf stable, and the uglier the better. So they've never been shipped around the country, which again breaks the fact of it being sustainable. If you're shipping it across the country, it's not sustainable, right? So it's not able to be exploited by, totalitarian agriculture system because the skin of it is very soft. So what they've been trying to do is breed a thicker skin, but whenever you have thicker skin pawpaws, they are less sweet and they're less delicious. So humans perfecting nature usually breaks it. But what I try to do is every pawpaw I I save the seed. I don't let them dry out because that makes them non-viable, and I replant them. And so I've been planting pawpaw for probably 5 years all over New Jersey, and I recommend you all do that too, and that can be definitely a helpful food source. But again, how much pawpaw do you think you're going to collect, and how much pawpaw do you think you're going to live off of until next season to get your fat sources? So black walnut, acorn, pawpaw, go explore those foods. Make sure that you're not just taking, make sure that you're restoring and regenerating the ecosystem that you harvest from, and work hard to get those food sources and see what it's really like. I think a lot of people have a sort of mythology about how easy it'll be. You just walk into the woods and find, as much acorns as you need, but you need to process those acorns. You can't eat them raw. You need to do things, right? Yeah, glad you enjoy it, friends. Cool, Sardella. Well, feel always welcome to come and visit. There's also eatwild.com, I think is what it is, and that's like local eggs and meats. And then there's a couple farm CSA websites. I think I have one on my website, returntonature.us, and there's like a search for finding your local CSAs in your area. So check that out. Support your local organic farmers and help them out, go weed for them or whatever you can do. Humans perfecting nature usually breaks it. Yep. Barbara, no problem. Thanks for joining, and this video will be available live for at least 24 hours. Maybe I'll try to save it this time and put it on that Instagram TV feature. And sorry to ruffle feathers, and maybe we will ruffle some, but I think they're important things to discuss, and I'm all ears. And I'm not saying there's any right answer here. There's no totalitarian, we should all do this to save the planet kind of thing. I think if anything like that, it should be, let's try to eat less than 200 miles away so that we can save all the fossil fuel industrial shipping. Don't forget, so if avocados are coming from Mexico, right, then you're getting those imported, and as soon as they get to the grocery store, basically what happens is like 50% of them are thrown in the garbage, right? So the fossil fuel that it takes to ship those avocados in is still wasted. It's still in the atmosphere, so toxic, right? And then out of that, they get on the shelf, right? And then you know what it's like to get avocados. How many of those rot? So really, they grow avocados in Mexico, they ship them, and then probably 10 to 20% actually get put inside somebody's body. So all of that fossil fuel use, the shipping, all that industrial, agricultural, practice is what I would call vegan. If you think vegan is, saving the toxicity of animals, then shipping anything anywhere is hurting animals, and that's something that I think we should all consider. And then what is the solution to that? I mean, to me, like, the most vegan thing to do is eat off the ground, and if you start eating off the ground, you'll realize that you'll start starving to death if you just eat, greens. Greens provide vitamins and minerals. They do not provide any fat or carbohydrate. And so, go dig cattails, see how tiring that is. Go get yourself ankle deep in mud and start pulling out cattail roots so that you can harvest and roast them. See how little you actually get, right? And see how much work you have to do to get those cattail. It's very easy to go to the grocery store, and get that. So just some things to consider. Does anybody have any questions or things they'd like to add to this long-winded discussion on where you're going to get your fat source from less than 200 miles away? What's up, Forgotten Fruits? Hope all is well. Oh, by the way, we've got some St. John's wort infused oil that I posted about yesterday. Thanks to everybody who bought a Datura infused oil or St. John's wort oil. I still have some St. John's wort oil available. We sold out of the Datura infused oil. What I'm thinking about, right, Nicole, so you can get fat from acorns. Try it. Try it. Try to live, show us on Instagram Live how you live off of acorn all year. And I've done that. I'm now 15 years into foraging or something, 10 years, and I've collected acorn until I'm blue in the face. And let me tell you, it's a lot to process, it's a lot to collect. You burn a lot of energy doing it. You have to process it out, and then you start using machinery, and then you're tapping into more fossil fuels. And if you do it by hand, you're going to sweat your butt off, and then by the time you get your little acorn pancake, it's not going to be as much calories as if you bought it in the store, and then you're getting diminishing returns, and diminishing returns on calories is called starving to death. There's a reason why native people ate the diets they did. Exactly, Forgotten Fruits. That's what people don't realize. It would be easy to get acorn flour in the store from child slave labor in Asia, but it's hard to collect them off the ground and grind them up and process them and leach them and then make all the kind of products, breads and things out of them, and have enough to actually sustain yourself and live off of it. It would be a full-time job. You'd have to quit your job and have 25 people pounding and collecting acorn all day while the acorns are out there, and that's survival practice. That's it. That's what people in, indigenous culture did every single day, 12 hours a day for probably 2 or 3 months. And so if you're not going to do that, just consider that there's something called diminishing returns. If you burn more energy than you get out of the food you're harvesting, that's called dying, right? No other way. Everybody on every survival show you've ever seen is dying. They're just prolonging their death. If it was a longer term situation, they'd all die. Les Stroud would have starved to death every single time he went out there. He was not getting enough calories to survive. He was getting enough calories to slow himself down so he could have 3 to 7 days out there. It's a very different story when you're actually trying to provide yourself at least 2,000 calories. And that's 2,000 calories is for sitting on a computer all day. You know what I mean? You need 5,000 to 8,000 calories. If you're going to collect your own firewood, if you're going to walk to harvest your own food, right? You can't just live near cattails, right? You have to camp somewhere away from that swamp because you'll get destroyed by mosquitoes. So now you're talking about walking a couple miles in the sun, right? You're talking about digging in muck all day for a very small amount of carbohydrates, and that really changes the equation. And a lot of people don't think about that because a lot of people don't have that experience actually foraging for your food and trying to live that way. So try it. Try to get your fat and calories from less than 200 miles away and see what you end up eating. Sardella says you love the Datura oil. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. If anybody has bought a Datura oil, please send me a message, because what I'd like to do is some group meditations. One of the things I want to start incorporating into the herbal goods that we provide is kind of like collective experiences, trials, clinical trials, informal, non-clinical trials, I should say. Watch out for the C word. So like with the Datura oil, imagine if we take, you know, the full moon and we all sit together with Datura oil and we anoint a certain place on our body and we meditate for 10 to 15 minutes and then share our experience. So if you're interested in doing things like that, let me know. I'm also making a mugwort anointing oil, and it will include a collective meditation that we'll do for everybody who buys it. So thank you so much to everybody who supports this work. This is turning inside out. You know, the more that we collectively discuss these things, the better, I believe. Reen Squatch says, would love some of the St. John's wort oil. How do you use it to support connective tissue? So basically, connective tissue is about two things, right? So you have this topical oil, which helps to absorb into your skin to regrow the connective tissue, and then you have the fact that as you're massaging the topical oil in, you're increasing blood flow to that area, and your blood contains the building tissue, right? So if you're mineralizing your body, right? So say you're taking stinging nettle with blackstrap molasses, or and horsetail, right? A teaspoon of horsetail, stinging nettle with blackstrap molasses. Your blood is full of minerals, right? And then when you're massaging the area which has damage to the connective tissue, the minerals are being transferred through your blood into that area. So you're getting both effect. That's why every topical issue, every inflammatory issue should be addressed internally and externally, right? Anything presented on your skin is also an internal issue, right? The skin is your second liver. When your liver can't deal with it, it pushes through your skin. So, you know, that would be a little idea there. Yeah, just send me a private message if anybody's interested in any of the herbal goods that we're making. Of course, me and my friend Lauren, and then a whole bunch of Cherry Valley Cooperative people are really interested in joining the Return to Nature magic making. And so I'll be headed to the apothecary this week for 2 days. I've been at Cherry Valley Cooperative. We're building a food forest in the woods, and we're also get free reign to, there's a greenhouse with tons of herbs, and we jumped right in, and they're gonna plow a field today so that we can start an herb garden. This way, pretty much everything will either be wildcrafted or grown in the garden. So I'm gonna be growing like all kinds of wonderful herbs so that we can make all kinds of beautiful goodies to share with you all. Including I'll start distilling and making hydrosols. Really excited because Barefoot Botanicals down the street from here makes hydrosols, so I could always grow or harvest from the wild and then bring it there, and we'll make hydrosol together and then share it with you all. Forgotten Fruit says, love fat from pepitas, pumpkin seeds. We should tend big patches of them. Hardy Harley heirloom pumpkins. Totally. What a lack of utilization. Like, there's so many pumpkin growers that grow these nasty chemical pumpkins, and they just let them rot in the field, right? And it's for Halloween for like 2 days, but every single one of them has beautiful pumpkin seeds inside of there, which are high in iron, very high in minerals, have fat and carbohydrates. So pumpkin is a great source of seed. But the thing of course is, you don't just get a bag of pumpkin seeds. You get a pumpkin, you have to break it open, you have shells, you have to shell it, you have to roast it, you have to do things, and all that requires energy, especially if you're living kind of primitively to the point where you want to roast it on a fire, right? Then you got to collect the wood, you're burning more calories, all those kinds of things. So pumpkins are a great thing. Self-perpetual, I save some of the videos. Sometimes I forget to hit the save button. The Instagram TV thing is a decent feature, but it only lets you have a 10-minute video. So as long as I keep them under 10 minutes, then I can upload them there. But if it's more than 10 minutes, it doesn't let me. So that's technology, you know. So feel free to be in touch. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for sharing. Hopefully this is some food for thought, and feel free to message me with any questions or ideas, and we'll further discuss these things. Many blessings. Peace.